Well, we're doing things like alkaline water and lots of vitamin C, lots of vitamin D, vitamin A, trying to get fresh air, all the things that I talk about: exercise, sleep, fresh air, fresh water, good food, try to eat organic as much as we can, try to get some little bit of exercise, get out of the chair and away from the computer and do some exercise. And I think that that's what's really, really important. And the other thing is a lot of, our emotions play a big role on what happens to our bodies also. And if you live in that state of fear, that big fear factor, what that does is it suppresses your cortisol levels and it increases your cortisol levels and makes you more susceptible to illness and disease. So my husband and I, we just don't live in a fear-based place about all this stuff. We sort of look at it and say, I'm not going to get the vaccine. I'm not going to do it. And whatever happens is going to happen. And if I have to self-quarantine and hole up in my house with food and vitamins and water, that's what I'm going to do.
While you can still get vitamins.
While you can still get it.
Dr. Sherri Tenpenny, stay there. I want to get into the fact that Dr. Monteith has a flu report from the CDC saying it's going to peak the middle of next month, right when all the vaccine injections get going. I want to get into adverse reactions in Europe from the vaccine and other vaccines. The forced inoculation. Stay with us. Alex.
Here that build the big guns. Here that build the death planes.
Dr. Sherri Tenpenny is our guest. Sherri, I want to get into the open announcements trying to force police, firefighters, military, medical workers to take the shots, threatening to fire them. But also just the vaccine manufacturing process, the adjuvants, the fact that Dr. Monteith, medical doctor, was on with us yesterday, and he talked in detail. And we went to the CDC's own website, and they admitted that upwards of 37% of people they've tested in the U.S. and also in Australia have been found to have the H1N1 and didn't even get sick from it. And it appears to be very mild. And this whole thing, we know they've been secretly preparing for it since January. Give us your take on that.
Well, it's not that much different than what was happening with the bird flu with H5N1, Alex, 3 years ago, and that they were saying that there were tens of thousands more people in Southeast Asia and China and around and in that part of the world that had been infected and weren't even sick enough to go to the doctor. And yet the ones that were the most sick and in the hospital and perhaps had a fatal or a bad outcome, those were the ones that they were using only for the statistics, so that if they admitted 100 people to the hospital and 50 people died, they call it a 50% death rate. But the truth is if 100 people went to the hospital and there were 10 or 20,000 people who were sick enough to not even, or who weren't even sick enough to go to the doctor, that changes the denominator and makes the death rate, some infinitesimally small number. And I don't think it's any different now with the swine flu. I mean, they've said that they thought that by flu season this year, almost a third of the general population in the U.S. would have either been exposed or would have been sick by the H1N1 virus. So what is the big deal? They say it's highly infective, but it has a low virulence, which means a lot of people can get it, a lot of people can spread it around, but not very many people get sick from it.
Continue breaking that down.
In terms of, what do you mean?
Why are they hyping it then if it's no big deal?
They really want us to get this vaccine for one reason or another. And one of the things that I've said for a while is that this is either phase 3. This is like when you're in the Navy and you have to do all of these final checks before you you launch a ship out to the ocean. This is either the final test to make sure that all of the implementation things are in place before they pull the big trigger in the final one, because it's looking less and less like this is going to be it. We've had 3 trial runs. We've had SARS, we've had H5N1, and now we've had this one, the H1N1. They're talking about it. Is it going to ramp up this winter? And wouldn't it be a coincidence if it ramped up right around October 15th when the vaccine was supposed to be delivered? And, they've got these emergency utilization authorizations that are sitting back in the backdrop, the EUAs, which have been put into place by the 2006 PrEP Act, so that at any given time, the head of Department of Health and Human Services can just say, oh, we really need this vaccine. We don't have enough vaccine. We haven't manufactured enough of it. Let's pull in all the vaccine we can from everywhere. Oh, isn't it interesting? The ones we have the most of came from China and from and from Europe, and they're the ones that have the squalene and the ASO3 and the MF59.
Well, let me stop you. I want to go through that, but you're saying pull the trigger on the big event. All these little events, dry runs to set up the medical tyranny infrastructure. Ron Paul talked about that last hour. Are you saying they may release something else or try to do a forced inoculation? What is the big event?
Well, either that, there is the virus gets suddenly worse, either something is released. It seems so weird, Alex, that if something was really made in nature, which they're trying to make us believe, would suddenly have a ramp up. And particularly since everything coming out of South America and the Southern Hemisphere says that it didn't ramp up at all down there. So could it be that they're going to have another test tube-made virus that could be released at some major event in the winter? You know, we've got the Winter Olympics that are coming up this winter, and it makes me nervous to think that there'll be people that will be going to Vancouver from all over the world and in the middle of the winter time. And is that a point in time where the virus may be contracted, be worse, and be spread by just the humans going back home?
Doctor, we're about to break, but I want to spend time on this in the next segment. I want to flesh this out because this is what every other medical doctor I have on says they believe is being set up. And my dad called me Sunday night and said, check your email, and I didn't see it, and I need to call him and find out what he was talking about. He said he got a CDC report that he was reading online that said, oh, we believe it could mutate, and then they gave the mutation into something super hyper deadly in the next few months, and they gave the calculation. Are you aware of what he was talking about?
No, I've read a little bit of that, but I haven't perhaps read as much specific as what you have.
But that's exactly what you're saying, because we see this massive buildup, troops suddenly popping up on the streets all over the U.S. and Europe. Yep. Stay there. Let's talk about how this may unfold, because we've never seen such a buildup at this level. Dr. Sherri Tenpenny is our guest. DrTenpenny.com is her website. Stay with us. Dr. Sherri Tenpenny is our guest. Doctor, continuing along the line that you've gotten into about all the evidence showing, pointing towards them releasing something more deadly or knowing it's going to mutate, the CDC report saying it may mutate into something extremely deadly. Continue.
I read a report, I think it was a couple of days ago, and I just skimmed it. I didn't really read at the details of it, but it was talking about the H1N1 morphing into something and being a different subtype. And I thought, well, now, isn't that just interesting? We've just spent $10 billion manufacturing a vaccine by 5 different companies and bottling it all up, and even their stuff isn't going to work. You know, if this is really true that the virus is going to morph, and they claim that in order for the vaccine to work, it needs to be an exact match, except, of course, Nancy Cox, who once in a while has said, and I talked about it in my book, Foul, where she said, well, you know, sometimes if it's a close match, it'll be okay. So how close is close enough? You know, is the vaccine going to be, even in their own mind, is it going to be good enough to protect against this morphed, very much stronger, more virulent virus? Because at that point, it won't match the virus that's in the vaccine anyway.
What about, for the last month, all these nursing associations and nurses and their husbands and wives have been calling me, sending me letters now. We've posted on Infowars.com and PrisonPlanet.com where they're told 3 different things in different letters. You take the shot or you're fired. You take the shot or you wear a mask for 6 months or you're fired. Or we'd like you to take the shot. But it's all 3. And then now at schools, they're not even asking. They're just telling parents you've got to do it. They're now making the nurses take the regular seasonal flu shot. This is confirmed. It's now come out in mainstream news weeks after we covered it. And Obama does this military tactic of denying, so everybody kind of stands down, so our opposition can't articulate what's happening and build to resist. The polls show the majority of people don't want to be forced to take it and don't want to take it. But there's this whole kind of quiet, under-the-radar program, and I've talked to nurse after nurse and firefighter after firefighter. They tell them, you got to take this. Many have already been forced to take it at Seton hospitals here in Austin. And don't tell anybody we made you do this or you're fired. I mean, it's like a huge curtain of tyranny, and oppression is lowering over us.
I certainly hope that a lot of those people that heard that will be brave enough to maybe partner with several other people who were told the same things and come forward and expose that. because now we're talking about American against American and neighbor against neighbor and even friend against friend doing these sorts of things. This really is tyrannical, those sorts of things. And people have got to be brave enough to be able to stand up and step out and say and expose the people that are saying this, and that they can expose the persons who told them to say that, because then finally we'll go far enough down into the rat hole, we'll find the rat and who's giving these sort of orders and making this be that we have to take this medication and have one American have to be forcibly giving it to another.